It was the summer before I began 7th grade. My mother came to me and gave me a book and said, "Zachary, this will help you in junior high." The book was The Prince by Machiavelli. My mom was a bit of a realist, but her guidance was actually very helpful because I was growing up in a bizarre, truly primitive, backward society. It was the 1980s, and I was growing up in Nashville, Tennessee. Now, Nashville 35 plus years ago, you might imagine as a city entirely populated with rednecks, honky-tonks, and a few recording studios. But we lived in a different part of town. We lived in an area called Belmead. And Belmead was a neighborhood full of old money, debutantes, and a country club so exclusive you had to be the correct race, the correct religion, and be from one of the correct families. Belmead, in this area of Nashville, was very much like Taylor Swift. It wanted the world to completely forget that it had ever been anywhere near a banjo. Case in point, Belmead had what could only be described as a militant homeowners association. And they intimidated all the realtors in the area not to sell a house, not to a black family, but rather to the family of the man in black. That's right, June Carter Cash, wife of Johnny Cash, wanted to buy a house in our neighborhood, and the homeowners association pretty much said, "Oh, bless your heart, no way." I can only imagine the conversation like, "But the man wears black all year round. How does he play tennis?" As you might imagine, Belmead was a very closed environment. Moving there was a lot like going to live among the Amish or a troop of mountain gorillas. It was very difficult to be accepted. Fortunately, we had one advantage in that my father was the very socially acceptable occupation of being a physician. This is back when being a doctor actually still meant something. But my mother knew that our lives would be a lot easier if we were able to assimilate as much as possible. So Mom went out, she joined the junior league, she made sure we went to the correct church. I was sent to the right school, and we never, ever mentioned my father's deep, dark mistake from his youth. My father, when he was very young, had fallen in with a bad crowd and made a poor choice of allowing himself to be born and raised Jewish. Yes. "Well, honey, they're perfectly fine to fix your taxes or your daughter's nose, but you don't marry that." As I said, I was sent to the right school, an all-boys prep school that had been founded by a Confederate general 2 years after the end of the Civil War. I'm sorry, the War of Northern Aggression. As you might imagine, the school was very proud of its Confederate roots, and even on special occasions would actually fly the Confederate flag over the campus. The school's stated mission was to make us into Southern gentlemen. And as part of our education, we had mandatory training in ballroom dancing. Every Friday evening with girls from our sister school, we were taught important life skills such as the Viennese waltz, the foxtrot, and once, when they were going to decide to let us be all wild and crazy, the Charleston. We were also taught important life skills of etiquette, like how to fill out a proper dance card, how to write a thank you note, and how to avoid major social faux pas, like the time I received a 5-minute lecture because I had forgotten a handkerchief. "Mr. Wilks, if a gentleman is not wearing gloves, he must have a handkerchief to put in his right hand. Otherwise, his bare hand might come into contact with the exposed flesh of his partner's back. A situation so lewd, to think of it just gives me the vapors." I know the idea of little kids dancing together sounds adorable, imagining little girls in taffeta dresses and lace and patent leather shoes, and little boys in tiny loafers, blazers, and clip-on ties. But we were not cute little kids. We were obnoxious teenagers suffering through the worst moments of puberty. It was all acne and incredibly inconvenient erections. I was 13 and the same height I am now and had absolutely no control over my body at all. I am sure the girls that had to dance with me felt very much like a bunny rabbit would in the hands of Lenny from A Mice and Men. But you're probably asking, why? Why would a community subject its daughters to such risk of bodily harm? Because Belmead had balls. Balls, cotillions, soirees, galas. This was a place where people would actually use the phrase, the season, and they weren't being ironic. My mother did not like a lot of things about living in Belmead, but one thing she did love was these galas and balls. She loved planning them, she loved attending them. She would go to all of them. The luau for lupus, the promenade for prostate research, the hoedown for homelessness. The scary thing is only one of those is made up. And now that I had completed a semester of ballroom dancing, my mother decreed that I was now ready to go with the rest of the family to the event of the year. The eve of Janus, New Year's Eve ball, and I kid you not, debutante ball, at the humongous Opryland Hotel. I was a bit reluctant about doing this, and I was kind of proven right, but my mother reassured me that I had no choice. She explained, she says, "Let me tell you what's going to happen, Zachary. You're going to go to the gala, you're going to bring a date, you're going to have a magical evening and create a memory you will have for the rest of your life. God damn it." Mom was right. It was going to be a memory I was not going to forget. But in fairness, I think my mom was pushing me because she was very concerned about my social life. At this point in my life, I had never been on a date. I had never even kissed a girl. And I was really into comic books and video games, and the absolute high point of my life at that time had been my week at space camp. My mother, I think, I had the thought that my mother was very concerned I was in danger of becoming a antisocial geek who would eventually die alone in my parents' basement, surrounded by cats and empty pizza boxes. Part of the reason I thought my mom might be thinking this is because one day when she was driving me to school, she turned to me and said, "Zachary, I'm concerned you're going to become an antisocial geek who will eventually die alone in our basement, surrounded by cats and empty pizza boxes." But of course, what kind of girl is going to actually go on a date with a geek like me? My mother reassured me that would not be a problem. "Don't worry. Any mother in Belmead would gladly send her daughter on a date with Charles Manson, as long as it meant that that mother could then tell all her friends at the junior league and the country club that her daughter had already made an appearance at the eve of Janus." Mom wasn't wrong. I called out my junior high school crush, Katie Beauregard, and Katie's mom readily agreed. I have no idea how Katie felt about it at that time. I didn't know that much about Katie at all. I mean, I knew the important things. She was really cute. She had this lovely, long, curly red hair. And she was one of the first girls in our grade to start wearing a bra. Like I said, the important things. But that evening, I learned something incredibly interesting about Katie. She was just as much a geek as I was. She loved Doctor Who. She had been to space camp. And she always carried in her purse for emergencies a 20-sided dice. Talk to your Dungeons & Dragons friends. They'll explain that one. And before the evening took a terrible turn, we had a wonderful time debating such important things like who would win in a fight, the Death Star or the Starship Enterprise. Said we were having a great time, and then disaster struck. The orchestra started playing. It was the Tennessee Waltz, a song I knew very well because I had crushed many toes while trying to learn the box step to that song. All the couples began to move towards the dance floor. And though I was panicked, I did as I had been trained to do. I put my left hand behind my back and with my right hand stood up and reached for Katie's hand. And Katie, as she had been trained to do, reached for my hand. And as she stood, I saw the absolute terror in her face. But then something wonderful happened. She got a mischievous look in her eyes and she whispered to me, she said, "Hey, do you want to get out of here?" We snuck out of the ballroom and explored the hotel. And then we eventually made our way to this huge atrium where they had an indoor garden, complete with this stream running right through it. And there, by this small waterfall and a weeping willow, I had my first kiss. Later, we made our way back to the ballroom. It was after midnight and the orchestra had left, and they had brought out a DJ who was playing pop songs for the remaining dancers. And as we walked in, he put on "It's the End of the World as We Know It" by R.E.M. Katie grabbed my hand, pulled me onto the dance floor, and we danced. We danced as 13-year-olds are supposed to, wild and free, and as if nobody is watching. But oh yes, somebody was watching. From across the ballroom, I saw, sipping what I knew would be a very dry martini, my mother. And she looked at me, and she just smiled and nodded. She knew I'd be okay, and that yes, I'd created a memory I'd remember for the rest of my life. Thank you.